I'm John Lindner. I work in communications with the clubs here, Louisville City and Racing, and just kind of wanted to introduce you to our format tonight and what we're doing here. First of all, thank you for being here, for being season ticket members. It's a great turnout, and we're obviously excited about the upcoming season. We were able to accommodate more than 150 people here tonight. Everybody who signed up was able to get in, so we're fortunate in that regard. And had a lot of people submit questions. I've gone through those over the last 24, 48 hours, and I think everybody who submitted a question, you'll hear your name tonight. We had obviously a lot of duplicate questions, so we'll try to hit every topic one time as opposed to going back to certain subjects like what's going on with the GM search, etc. So you will hear your names, and I try to give everybody credit for the questions that they ask. We plan on being here until around 8 o'clock. We could go a little longer. We want to get all the questions in, and I've heard a rumor that there's some cold beer in the back if we want to unwind that way. We are at a soccer event after all. So glad to be joined by John Neace. He's the chairman and CEO of Soccer Holdings, and James O'Connor, the president of the organization. And John, if you want to get started, I know there were a few words before we get to questions that you wanted to share.
Sure. Hello, everybody. If you don't mind, I'm going to try to read this little prepared statement. I'm not somebody who's out giving speeches or whatever all the time, and I don't by any stretch consider myself to be a speech maker. So first, I'd like to thank you all for coming. My mother always told me that half of life is just showing up, and whether you all feel that way tonight or not, we do appreciate you showing up on this beautiful spring almost evening in Louisville. Tonight's topics, at least some of them, aren't pleasant, and I'm glad that we are finally able to address them with you. We will try to be as candid as we possibly can and ask only that, one, you don't take individual sentences out of context, and two, that you consider them around the entirety of whatever response was provided. And if you need a little more clarity around that we go ahead and ask that question and get it answered at that time. I'd like also to just remind everybody that the events we're talking about occurred nearly 2 years ago. And while that by no means justifies them, hopefully it allows us to amplify the many positive steps that have been taken both as a result and to do everything in our power to prevent them from happening again. Please keep in mind as we address the past that James will have his take on certain points and I will have mine. While our approach may differ, our end goal is the same, and that is to protect our players while simultaneously holding them to the standard required of professional athletes and the culture of our organization. It is important to note that we might all want full transparency in every situation, but sometimes circumstances or the requests of the individual make that impossible. Also, people change and their desires change with them. So often, our response is reactive, not proactive. One thing we have certainly learned from this is that we may need to be more proactive on certain issues as we proceed and progress. And my hope is that all of you here will consider the entire body of work that is Soccer Holdings and not just focus on the negative events that have occurred. We acknowledge those events and hopefully can demonstrate the actions taken and the path forward tonight.
That's it. Thanks, John. Is it still on?
Nope.
Is it on now?
Nope.
Pretty sure it's dead.
Nope. It's on now.
It's on now. Sorry. So we will start with the Yates report and the NWSL Players Association joint investigation. This question was brought up by a number of you all in the room, season ticket members, including Tessa Yusunis and Adam Busa. And I'm sorry if I get anybody's names wrong tonight. And I will read this question. I think it's dead. So, I will read this from Holly Freeland. And this is for John or James. It says, even though both reports showed systemic abuse across the NWSL, what actions or behavior would you take responsibility for that happened specifically with racing? And with what we know now, what would you have done differently if given the opportunity?
All right, I mean, I can start with that. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. I appreciate the opportunity to speak and to give a viewpoint on a number of these questions that will come up tonight. I think the biggest thing is regret to start with. I think when you look at the appointment, I never believed that anything like that could ever happen at our football club. It's something that will never leave me, if I'm being totally honest with you. Things that we've learned from or done differently, I think when we look at the process to hiring any individual, I think has significantly changed. I think when we look at the involvement, we'll say, from players relative to Kim's appointment, when you look at the involvement relative to the players of not just this football club but previous football clubs. As an example, we spoke to multiple ex-players before hiring Kim to really delve into the background of what the player experience was under that coach. And I think that's something we've continued with any future appointment around the whole organisation, is there's a greater depth around, we'd say, that process, and that's probably the biggest thing that we've done throughout, I would say, that process.
Next, multiple season ticket members brought up the topic of retaliation by former coach Christy Holly. This question comes from Jesse Bennett for James. Do you have any regrets regarding not addressing player concerns about mistreatment sooner, particularly regarding players who previously came forward to ask for help and felt they were put in a position for possible retaliation?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the biggest thing with that as well is I think you have two, what I would say, issues. You're not comparing apples to apples, so I want to be pretty clear with the players that came originally had different complaints, certainly relative to the specific issue that ended up with the firing. I think as soon as we found out with something at that level, we acted immediately. And I think relative to 3 players that had come and had an issue, I think people need to remember that you're 4 months into a brand new team, into a brand new organisation where people are still trying to build relationships, people are still trying to form trust. And I think the basis of every relationship is trust, and I think that's something that every organisation strives to build, whether it's coaches to players, whether it's players to players. And I think that was something that we looked at. It wasn't as if we just dismissed what had happened with those players. We'd sat with the players, we listened to the players. There was multiple follow-up meetings with the players and the coaches relative to ongoing, I would say, trust building throughout the whole time with the staff, with the coaches, with the front office staff. So I think they're 2 sort of separate levels of complaints, if you like, and I think definitely a lot of learning for us as we went through that, not just in that instance, but I think in other instances throughout the last probably 2 years. I
think also there are a couple of issues around the group of player complaints that while I would love it to say that we're never going to have a complaint, I think it's actually good and healthy for the organization, any organization at times. If a player is complaining a little bit that they don't think they're getting enough playing time, those are the kinds of players we want, right? I don't really want, and I don't believe the organization wants, people that are content to just sit on the bench.
Were those the complaints?
That was one of the complaints, yes. Okay, so those sorts of complaints are always going to occur. And I think you're always going to have the question between a player and the training staff, and in that sort of case, also the coach or coaches, about when is a player really ready to return to the pitch? When are they fit? How are you feeling? Are you ready to go? What's the doctor saying or the trainer saying? I mean, those kinds of things are going to occur. And while we have to respond, certainly, and listen, some of those are sort of more judgment calls than, just there's a black and white to this. So at least on those issues, I don't think they're ever going to go away. And I think it might be helpful, Brandon, if you don't mind doing this, if you would just take a minute and or a couple minutes and walk us kind of through the technical side of how an organization should work. And I might tell you this to funny on Brandon and I before he does that. So, the first year this club was in operation, I was a shareholder, but I was not involved. I don't even know that I went to a match or two. I wasn't even really living here. It was an investment in Louisville, and I still believe in that investment, and I'm going to continue to do that. But we didn't have all the staff that we needed. We had a coach. Coach acted as GM at the same time. We had 2 assistant coaches. We did not have really anybody else other than some training staff that came through our relationship with Baptist. So as I get out and meet with the staff, various complaints, his biggest complaint, right, he had to wash all the kits, wash all the practice gear, wash all the towels, of which we only had 2 sets. So we had to do laundry every day, and we had 1 washing machine and 1 dryer. So you can imagine the hours that he was putting in. So I said, Brandon, I'll tell you what, let's me and you get in the car and let's go try to find a sponsor, a dry cleaner, a laundry service who'll do all the laundry. I don't know how many calls we made, but we couldn't get anybody to do it. And I said, I'll tell you what, I'll come in and help you. And I honestly think that's why he left for New Mexico, because he thought he was going to have to deal with me every day. Why don't you take it?
Okay. I think part of it is, like John's saying, I was here in 2015 when we started Lou City. I went to New Mexico in end of 2018 to help start New Mexico United. And part of it is, you are understaffed. You hire your head coach. He hires maybe an assistant, maybe a goalkeeper coach, and you're kind of running the show as a coaching staff. You want that first year coach to build the team, build kind of the culture, build those things. So you put a lot of trust into a first year coach. Can we agree on that, I guess? That they are kind of the one. So that's one of the reasons why I think the question is going to come up about, GM and things like that. But that's why you don't really have that early on in an organization. Those kind of safety nets, it's because you're allowing the head coach to kind of build the organization as they want it. So we did it in Louisville City, we did it in Mexico. Racing was kind of doing the same thing in year 1. A lot of individual teams were doing that early in the years. I think we're seeing the progress of more money being put into this league, more money being put into USL. So we actually have some help now, which is great. I'm not washing laundry anymore, which is good for me. Y'all can clap if you want. You don't have to, but it would really be awesome. So that's part of it, is you're trying to build a staff pretty early, bare bones staff, and you're trying to build trust in those things, and that's kind of what we were doing in those early years at Lou City and New Mexico and racing.
This next question comes from multiple season ticket members. I want to shout out Carissa Linford and Curtis Stauffer. They asked similar questions in this regard about the club's non-disclosure agreement with Christy Holly. They asked, what was the point of that NDA and why was there hesitation to break it through the various investigation processes over what was only a $5,000 penalty?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think, again, there's been a lot of coverage around that. I think in every situation, like every organisation, you're going to seek legal advice and seek out legal counsel. And I think once that happens, as an employee of the organisation, you're going to follow legal advice. And that's ultimately what happened in that particular instance. I'm not an attorney. I'm not someone that has ever experienced anything like this ever. There were multiple people involved in that, and like every organisation in a situation like that, you're going to seek expert advice, and that was the advice that we were given.
And I think also our goal was to protect the wishes of the player and to do what the player involved had asked us to do. And I'm sure that individual, though I cannot speak for her, was as bewildered and confused and not sure what to do about all of this as anybody else. So, was it the right course of action looking back? No.
Did we learn
Right.
about sexual assault?
Did we do what we were advised to do at the time? Yes, we did, right? So, whether we like it or not, right, we have to own that.
Do you have new lawyers?
I'm sorry?
Do you have new counsel?
Yes, we have new counsel.
Yeah, no, I don't like the intention for all of us is to be fully transparent and to own everything. There's nobody trying to get away from anything. I think we want to be as open and transparent as we can, and we're grateful for the opportunity to actually come out and speak tonight.
Can we go back to the question that was asked then about player retaliation before John Neace just railroaded your answer and talked to us about laundry?
We're not here to talk about laundry. Right.
I mean,
Okay,
if we're here in the
Absolutely.
apparent need to
What-
be transparent, I'd like for you to answer the question then.
Maybe read the question?
Not about the 2 towels that they had shared.
Well, I felt like I did as regards to player retaliation, or in one instance, I think that the point I was making was the 3 players when they came to complain, that there's a comparison relative to the level of complaint. When the 3 players had come and complained, there were multiple topics that were discussed. Not one of those topics had anything to do with anything similar to the issue of why he ended up being fired. And I think the point I was trying to make was, in that particular meeting with the 3 players, there was myself, there was HR, then there was Gareth Bates who was involved, who helped develop multiple meetings after that with not just those 3 players, but all the players. And that phase was very much as we saw it, as a trust building phase, where I've been through it myself as a coach, is when you sit with players, there are new players, there are young players, there are old players, there are multiple things that are discussed. You're always trying to generate a relationship where you can build trust and you can form a winning mentality and you can find line performance. And I think the point that we're trying to make is relative to that meeting. We felt at the time that meeting was best served by bringing everybody together and then having further weekly meetings with Gareth Bates around our cultural model. Our cultural model is PITCH, which is something that we developed along with Gareth, which stands for personal accountability, intellectually engaged, trust, commitment and humility. And this was something that the players were having on a weekly basis with Gareth around the forming of a culture. And the point we're trying to make is, in the forming of a brand new team, a brand new organisation, it's really important to develop trust. And that was something that everybody is trying to develop. And that was a big factor of why we continued to try to work along our cultural model with not just those 3 players, but with all the players, and try to get the staff with the players to work similarly to how Blue City did and the academy does, and build meaningful relationships. My biggest thing in life is to develop meaningful relationships, and to do that you need to be able to trust an individual. You need to be consistent in your behaviours, and I think that was the big point in trying to bring everybody together and to continue along with further dialogue to develop trust. We had young players that were coming from college that were mixing with older, more experienced players relative to training. You had different opinions on training needs to be tougher, training should be harder. Some players coming from college not used to training every day, the exact same things can happen on the Lou City side. So people just need to remember that it was a brand new organisation with a brand new group of people that was still trying to establish a group dynamic. And the point we're making is there are different types of complaints. And there was a severe complaint that was made that was dealt with within 24 hours. And that would be the point that I think we were trying to get across. There's nobody trying to dodge anything or to swerve anything at all.
Can you share what those other complaints were and if you felt at the time came to a good resolution and that trust was built?
Well, I think I want to try to be fair to the players, because when they did come and make those complaints without naming players, there were discussions around the medical practice, there were discussions around we'll say the difference in treatment between older players and younger players, and there was a discussion around one-on-one meetings as regards how players felt that they were being listened to in comparison to their age. Some felt as if younger players versus older players were treated a little bit differently. And again, for us, it was something that was really important to try to establish, is the building of trust. There was ongoing meetings and ongoing process to try to seek that out. You know, there was one particular player that was not pleased with how Christy had been speaking to her, and that was addressed privately with Christy, and that was something that we continued to try to work on with a group dynamic.
When you reflect back now, can you tie any of those together with the way you talked about him, or people reported being treated differently because of their age or how new of a player they were? Because I can start to see that.
Can you speak up? Sorry, I can't.
Yes. Do you, now that you look back, can you see a connection between those other complaints and the primary one that this is all about how perhaps he was trying to mold younger players or something? Do you see a connection when you look back and reflect now?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether he was trying to mould players. I think the player who felt as if in one meeting she felt as if he was that was not treating her correctly. I think there was a discrepancy of whether, you know, he would shout at her or shout at younger players versus older players. You would speak to some of the older players. The older players felt as if the younger players just needed to be a little bit tougher. So I think there are various viewpoints on it. But I think those things that were mentioned are starkly different than somebody coming in and saying that ultimately what happened and what he got fired for. As soon as that was brought, it was addressed immediately. Do I look back at those meetings and say, you know, could we or should we have handled those meetings differently? You know, I felt at the time we were trying to build trust with players. I felt as if it was really important for the players and the coaching staff to develop meaningful relationships, and I think that was something that we continued to try to do. And Gareth Bates led that on a weekly basis with not just those three players, but with all the players and all the coaching staff.
All right, I do want to move on. We have a lot of questions, and I want to try to get to what everybody asks. This question comes from Lauren Adams. It says, have specific steps been taken to ensure the mental health and well-being of players and staff members, especially those who played under the previous coach? She said, been taken. I think it's a key word, the verb. So.
Sorry, I just want to make sure, just following on from that, because again, just to your point on some of the things that were said, the one particular player who was not happy where she felt as if she was shouted at, or you know, the piece where I think she felt as if, you know, he could have perhaps done a way better job with her, particularly retaliation has been mentioned. So I think for us, again, when you get a situation like that, it always goes back to trust. And I think I want people to understand that even on the Lou City side, when I was the coach, there were instances where, you know, people would come with a complaint, you would sit, you would listen, whether it was to Brandon, to myself, or to Daniel, and you tried to build a relationship. And I think that was the basis of why we did what we did, of trying to continually meet and have follow-up meetings with players.
Is the trust gotten better as this year has gone on? Because we had a lot of players asked to leave last year, so I'm worried about the trust.
Well, So which players asked to leave, I suppose?
Susie has to leave, CC has to leave, Addison has to leave.
So Yuki actually wanted to go to Chicago because of her fiance. So I think that's slightly different. Cece wanted to go home to Kansas. I think what you found is a lot of the players who left actually wanted to stay, which again is testament to what we've tried to build here. And I think there are multiple instances where you could point to last season and be really pleased with the experience that the players had last year. Again, I think there's a stark contrast between 2021 and the changes that were made at the end of 2021 and where we are right now.
I'll circle back to the question that I just asked, which is, have specific steps been taken to ensure the mental health and well-being of players and staff members, especially those who played under the previous coach?
So again, great question. I mean, all throughout the forming of racing, there's been a sports psychologist that's been involved. There's been a clinical psychologist and counsellors that have been made available to all the players, and that's something that has been there from the beginning and has continued. There's also an employee assistance program that's been put in place for all employees. So I think we've done our very best to continue to put services and expertise in those positions to try to help.
In this question, another one that comes from many in the room, I'll shout out Chris Kalem for this one in particular, is what steps have you and Soccer Holdings taken to comply with the NWSL's corrective action statement based on the League and Players Association report? And then part two of that is what additional steps still need to be accomplished and what is the timeline for those steps?
Yeah, I mean, I think from our standpoint, we obviously had implemented a lot of change relative to the end of 2021. I think there were multiple changes that were made. I think when you look at not just staffing changes, I think the addition of some expertise in the employee assistance program. You know, we obviously updated policies relative to non-fraternisation, the non-discrimination. So I think there are a number of policies that have changed, all in line with the league recommendations. The one piece that we didn't implement relative to the end of 2021 was the hiring of GM, and that's something obviously we have actively worked through. Brandon and John and Aaron have worked through that process.
Now, I'm going to skip one so we can just expand on that with the GM process. So it was part of the NWSL report in December that the clubs in Louisville and the clubs in North Carolina that also operate USL clubs have a separate technical staff for their NWSL teams. And then this is a question that comes from obviously a lot of people in the room. There's a lot of interest in this topic, including from Allison Price. And I think this is a John/Brandon question, but just what is the status of the GM hiring for racing?
Okay, I'll take this one. So we understand that they wanted us to hire a GM, but we began the process of looking for a GM right away. I will tell you, as we say that, right? When we joined the NWSL, there were only 9. We became 10, I believe, or maybe we were 9 and then 10 came. So there weren't a lot of places to go look for candidates who had that experience, right? So almost anywhere we went, we were going to go with someone that was wanting a new challenge, wanting a new opportunity. So we conducted a number of interviews, looked at the resumes that came in, as well as going out on our own and talking to some people. We did settle on a candidate. Had everything have gone the way we wanted it to go, that candidate would have been here in December. Right, Brandon? Yeah, in December. Literally at the 11th hour, everything had been agreed upon, and something occurred that caused the candidate to change their mind. And that's the candidate's business, and we're going to leave it at that. So we started anew, and we have offered the position to an individual. That individual has accepted the position. They are currently employed elsewhere, and we can't really announce them until the background check and the other requisite things from the league are completed. But I expect that will happen next week, if not next week, early the following week, I would think, because the process has already begun. And based on this person's history, I would be shocked if something came up, or came out of the woodwork that we don't know about. But having had that happen to us once already, I guess, and I do just want to emphasize that this person was not her second choice. This person came as a result of the second search. But I feel really good about the experience of this individual, and probably equally or more importantly, this individual's experience in the women's game.
It's been 5 months. If you're trying to be transparent, why is this the first update we've gotten on that?
We were advised by the league that we could not speak about anything until the investigations were complete. And so we
They've
did.
been complete for months. Why didn't we get an update immediately after that?
If you don't think we were upset by that as you were, I'm sorry, but we were. But, the league is bigger than we are, and I think they wanted to be certain the investigation was completed.
When did that end?
Which one?
Whenever they said you couldn't talk,
Didn't end until the NWSL, the NWSLPA.
which was December, right?
Which was December, and we were ready to
So it's
announce.
March. We haven't gotten an update since then.
I think the thing to remember, guys, look, the most important thing for the whole organisation is that the right person is appointed, and I think the biggest thing is the communication around what could be said, relative to the first individual that was there, the ongoing process to get it right. I think Brandon, John, and everyone has done a wonderful job in trying to actually get the right person. What I can tell you is, I think when that person gets here, the feedback from the players, I believe, and Brandon, maybe you can speak about this. Do you want to just speak about the feedback of where the players are and everything? Because I think ultimately that's the most important aspect in all of this.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the process now for all these hirings is going to the players, especially somebody like has the experience of the person that we hired, has direct contact with women's soccer, has been involved with women's soccer for many years, and so we had a lot of people we could go to and talk to about this person, and so that's kind of the key is, and that's what made the search so difficult was, like John said, there's not a lot of people that have had this position or had this type of experience that we were looking for, but also with the women's game. So it's hard to vet people that aren't involved with the league. But we found somebody that we felt like touched all the points that we wanted and has got glowing recommendations from current players, players of other teams, former big name national team players, things like that. So this person has glowing recommendations, so we feel very, very, very confident in this hire.
And we don't, excuse me just 1 second, and we'll text this. We wanted to really get it right. And I think it's also important to remember that most of these candidates are gainfully employed today, right? They don't want to lose their current position because they came and interviewed for another job. I think we've all felt that at some point in our lives. So we can't share a lot of information as we're going through the process. We can certainly be fully transparent once that person is offered the position and has accepted and the other requisite check marks are there. But like the very last thing that happened in the process was talking with our players. Because as we all know, the more people that hear it, it's not very long in today's world before it's out everywhere, and quite often it's not out correctly.
Can you clarify that you did extend an offer before completing the background check and any other vetting processes that should have been taking place?
You don't extend an offer, you extend a conditional offer subject to these other things happening. You don't say the job is yours because if they fail the background check, they wouldn't be here.
Right, but what I'm asking is, you felt comfortable and confident enough in this potential hire to go ahead and say, hey, contingent upon all this other stuff, we want to go ahead and set you in place, instead of checking the other stuff first? I'm just asking for clarification.
No, I think the thing that, look, the league are heavily involved, and the guys can speak about this. I mean, Brandon, do you want to speak about this? Because you went through the process, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of just the process as it is. As any candidate before, I mean, as soon as we find the candidate we want to interview, we start vetting, I mean, on our end, as much as we can now. And so, you know, at meeting, talking to former people, going through social media, doing all those things. We're doing anything we do in-house, but that's not good enough that's not a background check. So just like anything, you send them like John said, a conditional agreement, a term sheet, if you will, that you agree on the basics, but until that background check comes through the league, through there, which is a very, very, very extensive background check that the league does. I mean, it's pretty incredible. So until that's done, yeah, nobody's hired yet. We do have a conditional contract out to somebody currently, though. That so hopefully the league does their due diligence because like anything, we are a portion, a shareholder ultimately with the league. I mean, we work for the league, so they have to make the final judgment call on any hiring we do. So.
How involved with the hiring of the GM were you, John? I know after the after the investigation came out and said that you needed to be separated from the racing side of the organization. So, just for transparency's sake, how involved, if at all, were you?
Yeah, no, I wasn't involved, and just again, I just want to tidy that up. I mean, I think what the investigations had said was that for teams that had multiple people that were involved in multiple teams, that there needed to be specific people that were involved in either team, relative to North Carolina and ourselves. But Brandon, John and Aaron were leading that search and have gone through that process relative to the GM on the racing side.
Can you tell if it's male or female?
No.
Yeah, we don't.
Sorry.
So
I promise as soon as we can, we will.
So question, since you all put out a conditional offer to someone who presumably accepted pending background checks and also finishing up prior commitments, what is the estimated ETA that we will hear about this GM?
I think we just said, hopefully next week. If not next week, then the following week. I can't imagine that it'll take more than a couple of weeks for them to complete that background check, but that's out of our control. So if you don't hear in the next week, it's not because we're not trying to tell you. It's we don't know yet either.
How quickly after the announcement will they be involved with day-to-day operations of racing?
Almost immediately, as soon as they can get here. I mean, obviously they have some things they'll have to tidy up where they are, and they may have a few things that they still need to deal with in the next few months, right? Because as we all know, sometimes you are the resident expert on an issue, and they need your help, and we certainly don't want to, not be good neighbors to those people, let's say, right? They need to finish up what they need to finish up for them, and we'll be as cooperative as we can be. At the same time, we've got to run our organization, and we've got to get that person here.
I'll ask a related question from Peter Brown and a few others in the room. Is who will the general manager of racing report to? Is there any thought to having a separate president of racing and Blue City? Question for John.
So I'm going to answer two questions here, right? Initially, the GM will report to me. Okay, so if this GM screws up, I expect you to talk to me about it, right? And I will be there to try to help address those things. I also want to give you all part two, which was sort of the second part of the question. It'd be wonderful if we lived in a world where we could print our own money and we could just hire anyone that we wanted every time we thought we had a need for a new position. Unfortunately, right, at least today, we are not in that position as Soccer Holdings or as Racing Louisville. And even this position was an unbudgeted and unexpected expense for us. And I can tell you, at least speaking only for myself, not for the other shareholders, right? But I think you would probably hear this sentiment echoed. To date, we've not made any money off of our soccer investment. We put cash back into these clubs every single year, and I can tell you I've been doing so for 8 years. And do I believe in these clubs? 200%. Do I believe in the city of Louisville, in the state of Kentucky? 200%. But I'm in the same boat as everybody else when it comes to those issues. I buy my season tickets just like everybody else does. I don't get any benefit, if you will, that I'm not paying for, and I'm doing it because I believe in what we're doing here, and I believe it's going to work. And I think when you look at us as Kentuckians, or you look at, greater Louisville, or you look at where the women's game needs to go, since we're on the women's side specifically tonight, right? We've been very involved. We were involved in writing the first CBA. We were one of 2 clubs that donated our individuals' time to put that together. We've supported the salary increases that needed to take place. We are well aware of the systemic issues that existed way before we got here. And we intended then, and we intend now to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. But we became a little bit of the problem with our first coaching hire. And I'm not trying to hide from that.
And I think that goes back to, the systemic issues that existed within the league, the trust building, and going back to the 3 players that came to complain, where you've, the medical issue, and then claim of retaliation, one feeling older players were shouted at or were spoken of differently than younger players, feel as if one was, verbally attacked and retaliation claims. We sat with the coach and walked through those complaints with him. So it wasn't as if they were just dismissed. And then we sat with all the players, and then sat with the staff, and then had multiple meetings after that. So we were doing our best to address some of these issues. And I think that's the biggest thing that we want people to understand. But they're very different to the issue that ultimately led to the firing. And as soon as that was brought to the table, within 24 hours, that individual was fired.
This is related, I think, to the reports and the GM process, but a question from Holly Freeland for James is, how is your role with racing different now than it was before the reports came out?
Great question. As you've just heard, the search for the GM was led by other people. Before we had a president of business, and then we had president of soccer. For me, it's been trying to work on the business aspect, trying to help grow the business, trying to push the sponsorship, push ticket sales, and then candidly, the biggest piece will be trying to regain trust and trying to make sure that. This is the first step in trying to rebuild trust, but people get an understanding of what we're trying to do and understand maybe where we're trying to take the club to. And that's something that, we want to be totally transparent about everything, tonight. And we're grateful for the opportunity, and I'm personally finally grateful that I can actually come out and answer questions and speak to people.
It's a question from Lee Neace. Sorry, was somebody? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt somebody. You're asking a follow up.
I was going to say, not trying to railroad anything here, right? But we've added Caitlin and given Caitlin, a greater responsibility in terms of the director of player ops side, right? The new assistant coach for racing, Beverly, has already made her impact felt. And we're not just resting on our laurels. We're saying, okay, we're going to put everything on this GM. It's a team, and we're building a team. And it takes a while, and we can't. I wish we could build that team overnight, but we can't. And we have to build some of this as we can afford it.
Question from Lee Neace. Is there a plan to bring in another director of player experience, or has this role been eliminated / absorbed into another role?
I think when you look at, and John just touched on, if you look at Caitlin Flores, she's a shining star of the racing organisation. She's come in to be the director of team ops. There's a pathway being created for her to be promoted because everyone has been incredibly pleased with how she's operated. The players and the staff love how she operates, and I think, Brandon, this would be a great moment for perhaps you just to touch a little bit more on Caitlin and how wonderful she's been.
Yeah, so Caitlin Flores, Caitlin Milby now as well. She's been married. She came on as our director of ops, and the player. What's the title? The original.
It was formerly director of player experience and operations.
Yeah, so it just got absorbed into Caitlin's role ultimately. I mean, she is the first person that greets players when they come in, meets them at their apartments, kind of takes care of them. I mean, she is their go-to person. The response we've got from the team this year has been through the roof, that she is always available, always there. I mean, she's truly the team ops person, team admin that kind of gets it all done. So we are more than pleased that we hired her. A year ago. And yeah, like James said, looking to increase her role even more, increase her potential title even more. But yeah, she's the one that if a player needs anything comes up, she is the problem solver. She's the one that deals with it, takes care of it. What an ops person, typically does. She crushes it.
So I will visit here. A recurring theme and question that you all submitted was the word trust. So I'll read an excerpt from Rob Price. He said, "Trust was broken and will only be restored by full transparency. I want to believe because I have believed in this organization since the very first ticket pre-sale. But right now I am just heartbroken instead. If the organization's plan is to just get new fans, please say so and I will get out of the way so you can do that." And a related question from Jaleesa Coulter is, what steps are being taken to repair the trust broken with supporters or even just to build a positive foundation with them? Question for John or James.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we're fully aware of the importance of trust. We've spoken at length about that. I think there have been other organisations that have faced similar situations, not just in the US, but in Europe. And a lot of the time you find people maybe that don't want to come out and front up. And I think this is the first step in trying to rebuild trust. I think this is the first part for us of answering questions and making ourselves available to any questions people have. I think the primary focus for us has always been the players and making sure that they're put in a great place, and their experience here, not just on the team side but in the whole city, is something that they have a wonderful experience. And because you have to remember when we started back in 2015, we started in a baseball stadium with a hope and a dream that we could get to what we currently have. It's been an incredibly long journey, but an incredible journey nonetheless, that people can take great pride in what has been built here. And there was an issue which obviously the way it has played out has led to a lot of untrust and led to a lot of questions and mistrust. And we're here tonight to continue to try to answer those questions, and we want to be as transparent as we possibly can. And then as regards the building of trust with supporter groups and supporters in general, I think nothing would make us all smile would be to continue to have relationships where we feel as if the club and the supporters are united as one. And Brandon, I know, has met with multiple supporters groups, and I think that's something we want to continue to build upon and try to develop relationships with Chris and his staff, with Brandon and his staff, and all the supporters groups.
Yeah, if I could chime in there as well, I think it's important to us all that we trust each other. And believe me, it's been a very trying time for everyone, I think, to trust in this and trust in where we're going. The NWSL themselves, right, was a staff of 14 or 15. I'm never going to say exactly I know the number, but it was in that range of people. They've now grown to 40. The league itself is making great strides, and it's backfilling and solving issues that came along And in my life, I've always looked at business many of the same ways I look at people, and they have to grow up. And the league has to grow up. The league's only been around about 10 years now. I think this might be the 10th year again. I may be off a year, but it's in that range, right? And it's growing up, and it's putting the things in place. And I can't speak for Jessica or for Bill, but we talk with them all the time. And I know for certain that they wanted to be very prudent and logical and tried to make sure that as they dealt with the systemic issues and introduced change, they introduced change that could be effective across the entire league and working to make the entire league better. And at the same time, right, working very closely with Megan and the Players Association so that we end up where both sides want to be, not just one. And I think the same is true for us in our supporter groups. We have to work together to get where we want to go and to be what we want to be. At the same time, we have to support. We have to show up, and it's not always fun to show up sometimes, but we still have to do it. And, I don't know any way around that.
Just clarification to James. You said that you and Brandon met with the supporter groups?
No, I didn't meet with the supporter groups. I said Brandon and Chris.
Okay.
And
Just
you
want
know I
clarification.
didn't meet with the
Yeah.
supporter groups.
So then it's like, you cut our meetings off.
I didn't cut any meetings off. I mean, I think, listen, the purpose of the supporter groups, I think there are further conversations to be had with the supporters groups relative to Brandon and to Chris. I know that they have met all of the supporter groups, but I think there's probably a private conversation if you feel as if I've cut supporter groups off or cut you off. If you want to have a chat to me after, then I'm going to be around on an individual basis to answer any question you or anybody else actually has.
This is a question that surpassed. So chronologically, we're going to go back a little bit. We kind of segue to the GM. This is a question from Allison Driscoll, and there's a part two to it as well. Is how are we to take the organization's steps forward in good faith following James's comments regarding the firing of Christy Holly, such as, quote, I don't know whether I would say it was illegal. Joe Havelda adds that there was a joke about pleading the fifth and laughing off the situation. James, can you offer your thoughts looking back on that interview?
Yeah, I can. And look, I think the biggest thing to remember in a situation like that is I'm a human being, and that was a mistake. And I think what is the context that people don't have around that is, if I was to say pleading the fifth, I assumed when you pled the fifth, it just meant basically you didn't want to answer the question. I had no idea that pleading the fifth actually meant that you were admitting some form of guilt, and that you were just trying not to answer the question. I think where I was trying to get to with that was we had obviously been given legal advice as to what we should say, what we shouldn't say. You also then had the issue relative to what the player was feeling, what she wanted. It was an incredibly scary time for her. Ultimately what I didn't want was to draw any kind of attention to a player or the players or to the club. Could I have handled that situation differently? Absolutely. The laughing piece is a nervous laugh because I'd been caught in a situation where honestly I felt as if no matter what I said I was going to get it wrong. The most important thing to me was that the player at the time was protected and that I didn't draw any kind of attention to anything that would cause any more difficulty for her. And that was the primary reason of trying to get through the interview. But this concept of that, I'm saying it wasn't illegal or that I'm in agreement with what happened.
Call it a subjective viewpoint.
Yeah, I call it subjective or objective. I remember exactly. I mean, guys, if I could go back and change that interview, believe me, I absolutely would. It wasn't as if I'm in any way trying to be flippant. It was at the time, I'm dealing with something I've never dealt with before. I'd made a mistake and I got caught by a question. If I say, yes, it's illegal, then it creates more of a furore around, which at the time, the player in question wanted everything to go away. She was incredibly frightened. And for me, I tried to answer the question in a way which would not draw more attention to the club, which would maybe scare her further. So I said it was, wasn't sure if it was illegal, objective versus subjective, started to ramble about pleading the fifth. It was a car crash, and there's no other way of saying that, and I'll fully admit that. It was a mistake, but it was a mistake built out of me being in a situation that I was unsure of what the best route of answering that particular question was. And I am by far not a perfect individual. I try to be as open and honest as I possibly can. And it was an incredibly difficult situation for me personally. I wanted to make sure that the players were protected. I know it's taken forever to be able to come out and actually explain that. I would love to have been able to do that previously, but I've had to fall in line with the line that the league had obviously given us. But obviously that was a mistake, and I know a lot of you won't know me very, very well, but there's enough of you that would know what I would stand for and how I have led myself throughout my time in Louisville. I've been here since we moved here 2014, and I've known a lot of you since 2015. So the disappointing thing for me was the fact that there was no sort of benefit as they were given to all the time that I've been here and my actions previous to that. That was an absolute mistake. It was a car crash of a thing to say, but it was led from a place of me not fully understanding how to best answer that question.
This is another kind of two-parter, two related questions that I wanted to read off. First one from Carissa Linford, who asks, do you think the players currently feel safe and that they can trust the organization? And then the second related question from George and Julie Love, how are the players guaranteed places to speak freely about any concerns?
Do you want to take the first bit, or do you want me to?
I think the players feel safe. I think the players understand what we went through, and they know that we're making the strides we need to make and putting the checks and balances, if you want to say, in place to assure that. Obviously, you never can speak for other people, so I hope we've got that right. But, three of our key players, right? Katie, Jalen, and Savannah all have signed new long-term contracts. I don't believe they would do that if they weren't comfortable here, or if they didn't feel like we were listening and putting the mechanisms in place that need to be in place to give them the opportunity to speak up. And, I hope they will do that, and we certainly will listen.
And I think just to follow up on that, some of the conditions around the environment, I think there's hiring of a player safety officer, which is has begun, and also then the real response, which is anonymous texting or hotline that all the players can call and make any kind of comment or complaint completely anonymously. So there are factors that we have definitely tried to listen to create a better and safer environment for all the players and all the employees of the organisation.
If I might add one more thing, I also don't think that the new players that we've signed would be coming if they didn't believe that we were sincere and they didn't feel that they could trust us. And, both from the international side and from players who've, already had a wonderful run in this league, we're signing players to come here and play. And I think they know the facilities, they know the training ground, they know how we try to treat our players. And they're comfortable with that. But I'd encourage you to ask the players, right? We're all in this thing together. So the closer we can, all get, and the more transparent we can be, ultimately at the end of the day, the better off we all are in this relationship, because it takes us all.
This comes from Adam Busa. He says, we We think that so far, racing has done the bare minimum for us to pay for season tickets, and that is mostly to support the players. Why should I be telling my friends to come to games, and why should I support this club in public without having to feel like I need to explain or try to excuse away what happened in the past?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a great question. I think for us, again, we're trying to build trust, and we're trying to own everything that's happened. We've tried sincerely since 2021 to implement change to ensure that, like, last season was completely different to 2021. I think the majority of players would say they had a completely different experience last year relative to 2021. I think the ambition of the club is there. I think to try to get things right. You can see with the player signings that the club have made, there's a nice mix when you look at some of the talent, the youthful talent blended in with the international talent. So we're very hopeful that there can be a successful year next year.
I think that question, though, and I apologize if somebody feels like I'm going off point here, but I think that question is a much bigger question than just, racing Louisville, right? I mean, I've lived in the city, in Greater Louisville for 42 years, right? And I've watched Cincinnati, Indianapolis, Nashville, St. Louis grow up around us, right? And while I'm still proud to call Louisville home and this is where I want to live, reality is we can do the same things that these other cities have done if we all work together and do it. And we need to all work to make Greater Louisville greater. So when we're talking to our friends or we're talking to our acquaintances and they say to me, "Oh, John, I love the stadium and what you all are doing," and I say to them, "Where are your seats?" "Oh, I've never been to a game, but I mean to go to one." Right? It's not go to one, it's support the club and do the other things that we need to do to make our community better. Our community has lots of issues right now, right? We are one of them, and we are taking the steps to, fix it. And we want you to hold us accountable. But I think we need to do that on all parts of what we are as a community, not just this piece. We are a top tier club with Racing Louisville. We're it. We're the best league in the world. We have some of the best players in the world. But if we don't support it, it won't be here. And I'm not trying to be the boogeyman. It's just reality, right? Clubs are escalating in value. There are other cities that want clubs.
You realize we're all season ticket holders?
I know we're all season ticket holders. But the question was, what do we tell our friends? And I think that's what we tell our friends. We need you. We need you to help. I mean, we got the Women's Cup here, right? We lost a lot of money in doing that. And we had 4, or at least, I think we're one of the 4 best clubs in the world, but we've got to support them. And if our community doesn't get it as a whole, then we're never going to get it. And it won't ever happen. But you can look around us within 150 miles in almost any direction, except maybe due east, and it's happened. So while we're not proud of it, we're owning it, and we believe we fixed it, and that it's only going to get better from here.
Have you done any anonymous surveys with the players at this point, say, a year's gone by? I know you're saying all these things that make you believe that they're trusting you, signing the players, giving the longer term contracts. But have you done like an anonymous survey with the players to make sure you're not blindsided at some point?
Well, the league did an anonymous survey of all the players and all the clubs. The NWSLPA did their own survey, and I don't know, Brandon, the answer to that, if we've done one of our own or not. Just specific Louisville.
Not in the past year, but yeah, the strength of the PA is kind of where this is going. Is the PA is constantly monitoring their own players in each organization. So they're all formed in a union, obviously. So it's one of these things where you know, if we send an anonymous email to our players, I mean, who is getting those results? Who is seeing them? I don't know if that, you know, I don't know if that does us much good. I think it's the PA, the Players Union, that is spearheading those things, and they will come to us if there are issues or if players say things on the anonymous level. I mean, that's just kind of how it's going to work.
Does that answer?
Well, yeah, there are ways to do it. I'm the HR director. There are ways to do it where you can keep it small, but still have it, just, it could be simple, one question, 2 questions, report back what the findings were and decide if you're going to take action on some or why you can't, just to kind of help you make sure what you're saying is actually what's
Sure, that's a good idea. And I mean, you know, it's probably something maybe that Erin could learn from you and, you know, help her do her job better, right? I mean, as we've said already, we're not, you know, we don't claim to have all the answers here. I mean, as you all know, it's well publicized, right? I never played soccer in my life. I've never kicked a soccer ball other than maybe trying to kick it with my grandchildren, right? So part of what, you know, the evolution, the development, and doing these things, we're learning every single day. You know, as he stepped away from some of these things that I have had to get more involved, it's a learning process for me. I don't claim to have all the answers. And even when I had, just a second, even when I had my other businesses, the things that I was involved in, right, we had an HR director who dealt with HR. And the one thing I have learned for sure in football, right, I can't be the striker and the goalie no more than I could be the quarterback and the receiver in American football. So we need the team. We will get all those component pieces if there are a few more that aren't here yet, just as soon as we either see the need today or can afford to do so.
I forget to ask the question and I apologize, but
Sorry.
Just based on, you know, how do we get other people to come? Like someone stated, we are in a room of season ticket holders. We already have our tickets.
Thank you
I've had
for
them.
that.
Sure. I truly want you to grasp the severity of this, and I want you to keep in mind that roughly 1 in 6 women in this nation have been sexually assaulted. And if you Google Racing Louisville right now, you may get the regular page at first. You may get something about the NWSL. You scroll a couple more things, and all it's about is sexual abuse. Reports coming out. A coach did a terrible thing. I'm glad we fired him within 24 hours. But honestly, if we bring that up again, it's a moot point. He is gone, but I want to know what you all are doing right now to make sure that this never happens again. I know it happens all over the world. I know it happens in other sports. That's not a good club to be in. That's not great. So truly, I want you to think about how 1 in 6 women that I might give a ticket to doesn't want to come here. Not every sexual assault survivor is going to be okay with coming in this stadium. If I'm being very honest and transparent right now, I've been sexually assaulted in my life. This really hit a chord that we weren't protecting people. I care about these players more than I care about this stadium, more than I care about, you know, whether the club leaves. I definitely don't want it to. But I want these players to be safe no matter where they are, and especially in my backyard.
And especially
I think we agree 100% with that. That said, right, and I say it with the utmost respect and humility, right? We're all human beings, and we cannot control every single thing that other human beings do, or it wouldn't be 1 in 6. All we can do is continue to strive to try to make it better and put the safeguards in place that hopefully prevent it. But secondly, if it does occur, that the individual affected is comfortable to speak up and that we can swiftly and correctly deal with it.
I think y'all are minimizing the culture of sort of weaponized misogyny that was going on in those other complaints. You know, you mentioned that some of the players had said, oh, tough enough, but I feel like the reports kind of indicated that that was y'all's response in all those conversations of building trust. And so I feel like there's so much more about that, right? Like when you weaponize misogyny shouting and everything? Why are we minimizing medical abuse? Like, let's not minimize those issues too, because that's not just gonna affect Racing Louisville, but that's the academy culture, that's the city culture, right? We've got kids, youth coming up in our programs, like, that's so much far reaching, and so you guys say you understand it's systemic, but also nothing like this has ever happened to you before, and like, that can't be both true. It has to be that there was some chosen and intent, some chosen blind spots. I'm not saying maliciously chosen, but things that were decided that it was okay that we don't take this too seriously.
We're not saying that we're trying to minimize those other things, and if that's what was understood, I apologize. That's not what I was trying to say, right? All I was trying to say when I was making that comment earlier was that they were two very different kinds of things, okay? And that they didn't occur like all at one time. They were different issues.
And I would just like to follow on from that. I mean, again, you know, this happened nearly 2 years ago, and specifically to what you're saying around the three players, I can't tell you exactly what was said from the three players. I can vaguely remember what was there, but certainly I can tell you that in no way are we trying to minimise what the three players had said, or we certainly didn't tell the players to toughen up. I can guarantee that. I mean, we actively listened, and we actively tried to put a program in place with weekly meetings around an ongoing process of trying to build trust. So we definitely didn't intentionally minimise, and we certainly didn't say, hey, we need you to toughen up. I think that's something that, again, I want to make sort of really clear.
Well, with all due respect, if I were you, I wouldn't say that they were completely separate, different issues. I would probably take that out of what you're saying, because it isn't, can't absolutely be sure of that, because of some of the things that they said, you know, verbal abuse and things like that. So I probably wouldn't use that going forward, just because you're.
No, I think
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
We want to represent the patterns, right? And like the patterns in the system, so that it's not just these isolated incidents of one bad actor.
Yeah, look, look, these are great points. I think what we're trying to clarify, and I take on board and appreciate everything you're saying. I think it's a great, from both the ladies, I think that's a fantastic point. Genuinely, I think what we're trying to get the message across is when something to that level that happened, we're not looking for a pat on the back to say, oh, we got it right, or we fired him in 24 hours. We're just trying to be transparent about how we handled everything and what we did. You know, I think the comments you both have made are definitely taken on board.
My last comment is, I recommend that you reach out to the Center for Women and Families, which is in Louisville on 2nd Street. It's the domestic violence shelter. They have a fabulous training program, and they train and will do workplace trainings just to help all employees recognize what it is like to be a victim of sexual assault. And they have people who are very brave people who talk about their experiences and what it's like for them outside now as they try to move on with their life. I mean, I could connect you with that. It would be a great, I think, partnership that might help you also, public image, but also with just connecting and highlighting that, bringing light to their mission and your mission in Rangerville.
That's a great point, but again, I'll try to, just trying to be open and honest with you, all right? We're on a journey that we've not been on before, right? And when I was originally asked to become chairman of this club, it was not to deal with any issue related to anything like this. It was, I'm here, aren't I? Okay, I'm saying though, I'd like to finish, please. It was to help get a stadium built, and then to help get a training ground built, and to help get an academy started so that the young people in our community have an opportunity to learn from football, but also, if they have the skill set, to get the proper training so that they can move on in their lives. And I do believe that we are accomplishing a lot of that. We started a foundation a year ago for the very purpose of taking the beautiful game even further into the community and doing other things. And I wish I could snap my fingers and say, everything's fixed, but I can't do that. And some of what some of what I'm involved in today, it's necessary, and somebody's got to do it, but we're learning as we go. So anywhere that we can get good advice or information, we're going to take it, right? But we haven't always dealt with it before.
So a little bit on this topic, I know that the players now have a union, and that's fantastic. So it means when they have complaints, they can go through that process that's protected by law. When it comes to the remaining of the staff that is on Racing Louisville, the women who work in the training facilities and elsewhere, also in the front office, how are you all changing your HR processes and procedures and staff potentially, hopefully, in order to make sure that those women and those people in general feel supported and heard and protected as well in whatever way they can?
So the players union has always been there. So the players union has been there from back in 2020, 2021. So the players have always had that.
But they just got a contract, yeah.
Option. Well, yeah, the CBA. But I take on board what you're saying. I think, look, the biggest thing, not just for any employee in the organisation, is the real response. The anonymous text line is something, and it's a hotline that anybody can connect to and can bring a complaint or bring something they're worried about too. And then you also have the safety officer within our organisation that people can go to as well. So it's not like we're sat thinking we have all the answers or we can't be better. We're striving to be better. We know we have to be better. And a part of that is continually trying to evolve and trying to put better practices and safeguarding in place.
So with HR in particular, are you all doing anything with the HR department? Because I understand that, if I'm remembering correctly, that the complaints were brought and HR was brought in, and then HR also brought in Christy Hawley as part of a conversation which the player did not have awareness of, and that in going into that conversation, that player was not aware that Christy Hawley would be there. So I'm wondering, is that person still here? And
well, let me just because a couple of things you're saying. So the players, there wasn't one, there was multiple players, but the players were told that when we started speaking, that the next course of action will be that we will be meeting the whole staff, and that was in the very original meeting, that everybody was going to be brought together. And I think the purpose was, like we're saying, was to try to build trust. I mean, you have to remember, there wasn't just, it wasn't one player making a complaint about Christy.
I was talking about the one specific instance, though, that was outlined in the report. I don't have it in front of me, but I know that there was a specific instance with one player in particular who came into a meeting and Christy Hawley was there. And where she was not expecting that. I was not talking about the larger meeting that you all had to build trust. I'm talking about one specific instance.
Yeah, the only meeting that in this instance was with 3 players. There was the 3 players that had come, and then basically that was the one meeting, and I think that where maybe there's a little bit of a disconnect. It wasn't like we were getting players coming on a daily basis complaining and saying, okay, we've got a major issue. And again, I just want to be, totally transparent. The first sort of complaint we'd had was in June with the 3 players that we sat and listened to, and told the players that we would be meeting, not just Christy, but all the staff, because the discussion wasn't just specific to Christy, it was around all the staff.
But the report identified that HR said they didn't know how to BCC because the players were unaware that they were going to be in that meeting.
But again, I'm not going to get into that. That's what was written, but I mean, I can say that the person that's in HR knows how to BCC, and that I was in the meeting, and it was me who specifically told the players that we would all be meeting together. So
you're saying the report is wrong?
I'm telling you what, I was in the meeting, I'm telling you what I was said, and I'm telling you that the person knows how to BCC. It's up to everybody else to decide on what's there.
It's a new HR person, correct?
It's a,
Is
sorry,
it that your head of HR is a different person from the person who didn't know how to BCC?
no, and again, I want to be really clear.
Right now, though.
Yeah,
It's a different
no,
person.
it's the same person, and the person did know how to BCC, but it wasn't that she chose not to BCC. The players were told that we would be meeting not just Christy but the whole staff, because the complaints weren't just around Christy. There was multiple discussion points, is what I'm saying.
Okay, but you still, there is.
Just to clarify, James, you're saying that you had a meeting with the players where it was stated that they would be in a meeting that did include Christy and the whole staff, so that when they were sent a meeting invitation, everybody would have been on that. Is that
Correct, and I believe that's what actually happened. I mean, but it wasn't just me and 3 players, it was myself and Aaron, and we were very specific of the next step will be everyone will meet together.
okay? I'll move on. So we have a question from Alan Spade. It says, how have you been able to overcome the negativity surrounding the events of 2021 and the subsequent reports to continue to attract quality players and other personnel? In that respect, do you feel confident that this is the best set of players and coaches that you could have put together, or did the circumstances limit some of that growth?
Again, I mean, I think when you look at the caliber player that has come here, when you look at the individuals, whether it's an international player that's arrived here, if you look at the players that have managed to stay and sign new long-term contracts, I think they're doing so in the belief that we can be competitive and that they can go on and have a really good year.
I'm confident that we have a good team. You know, we have the best player in the league at every position. No, neither does anyone else. Right? I mean, one of the things that is a standard in the NWSL that they're after is parity, right? I don't think any of us really want to see one all-star team travel around and play everybody. We want to play against people of likability, but I'm very confident in the players that we've signed and the players that were already here and are coming back. And one of the things, you know, I was more involved, if you will, as we hired Kim. And one of the things I love about Kim, and you know, when we were interviewing, he wants to win as badly as we do. Maybe even more so if that's possible, because it's directly his responsibility. And he's won everywhere he's been. So I think we're on the right path, and I think our players are going to show well. I will caution you though, you know, we have a few people who were injured, right? They're not all the way back fit to play yet. So whether it's 4 weeks or 6 weeks in, we should be at full strength unless someone else gets hurt. And I look for us to continue to improve. And I remember the last 4 games last season, 4 or 5. We started to see it last year. We started winning. So, yes.
And we did, just want to take note of the time here. We have about 20 minutes left. And we did receive some questions that were not related to the Yates and NWSL reports. I wanted to get to some of those as well. This comes from many in the room, including Michael Pop, and I think it probably is best fit for John, but James, feel free to chime in. Just when will development around the stadium begin, and how does the club plan to address parking as it builds around the stadium?
I wish I knew that answer. You know, we, as you all know, before racing, and I know your racing season ticket holders, right? We were on this track with USL, with the men's team, Lucy. Everything was moving, right? And then COVID hit. COVID brought everything to a screeching halt. We had people at that time who were just about ready, we believe, to pull the trigger and go with us on a couple of things here. And then, you know, everybody went home, and there was no development for a while. And you saw housing prices skyrocket because people decided to stay at home, and scarcity of new homes, and a lot of money went back there, and everything stopped. Today, we have we have one written offer in hand for a piece of the ground. We have not accepted that offer yet or rejected it. We have a couple of other groups that have made very strong indications to us for things that they would like to do as a part of this development ground. But the overriding question, right, that we deal with all of it is parking. You know, when you take ground to just build an entertainment venue or to just build some apartments, where you're displacing parking, not just game day parking for us or event parking for us, but also the resident parking when we have game day. And so we are working for solutions to that, because with what's happened to building costs over the past few years, and I don't want to bore anybody with an economics lesson, but what you could build something for is a lot higher today. Now it's starting to ease in some areas, but it makes a lot of projects that would work not feasible, because the person who's going to make that investment can't get the return they want because they got to build a parking structure underneath it. So I think that's slowed the development, but I believe the development is coming. Yes.
Kind of a follow-up to that question. As you know, as someone who parked in the Go parking lot for the first couple of years, it wasn't the parking that was a problem, it was getting out of the parking lot that was the problem, and the flow of traffic out of the parking lot and into the main thoroughfares, the interstate, etc. Have you guys started working with the city on how to improve that specific flow so that people can get out of the parking lots easier at the end of games?
Pull Brandon from the bullpen for that.
Exactly. I had a feeling it might come in.
So we knew early on last year that the exiting from the parking lot, the egress was an issue. We actually ran a drone every match, at the end of every match, that could oversee all of our parking lots. And through that process, we were able to divert parking, especially, I'll tell you, the initial thing we did, we emptied the purple lot and made them go right down Adams. And so Gold had to kind of wait on the purple. We stopped doing that. Purple now goes left. Gold can dump out sooner. Early in the year, we were looking at exit times around 38 to 45 minutes. By the last month of the season, we were down to about 18 to 22 minutes. So we've actually improved quite a bit. We also kind of know our thresholds as far as number, capacity, and things like that here. We saw that, if anybody's a police officer here, don't get mad at me, but we saw that if we were under 7,000 capacity, that we actually dumped quicker if there were no police out there. It just was faster just to get people out. So we have some processes in place that we're working on that we think we've improved across the board. I think we're going to keep running the drone, so we do see where bottlenecks are occurring, and we can do different things with the lights at some of these corners down here a little further down, and then those get blocked up. So we're still, the process is ongoing. We have improved, and I hope we keep improving is the key. But the drone, if you see it, that's what it's doing. It's only monitoring you. Don't worry about it.
For larger events like Thunder last year, it was multiple hours before we got out, and it was a moment when the fans was directing traffic. How would you all in the future address some issues like that?
Yeah, I mean, Thunder's a completely different beast altogether with them shutting down the highway. I mean, we don't have good infrastructure. We're 2 lanes in and out on a few different places. When the highway's closed completely, it's going to bottleneck, I think. That's Thunder. I mean, it's a nightmare, but last year was the first year we've hosted anything on Thunder. We will get better this year. Obviously, we saw the issues, but Thunder's kind of, we want to be involved, but it's a little out of our hands on some of it. I mean, you have a lot of people, hundreds of thousands of people down in this area. So if we get that many to a soccer game, then that'll be our problem at that point.
I will say though, I think that the city Metro Council, the mayor's office has been very helpful to us over the years in getting the stadium built and in helping with the transformation of Butchertown. We know the city, and we've already talked about it a little bit tonight, but the city had some bigger issues. And some of what maybe would have been addressed just in the normal course of time got put on the back burner, and we certainly weren't the most pressing issue. I know to us maybe we were, but I think to the city at large, we probably were not. And then you had the mayor's race coming. Mayor Greenberg has already reached out. We are talking about what the city can do to continue to help us. And, regardless of which side of the political aisle you're on, I believe that everyone wants to see this succeed, and we see the great long-term benefit to the city. So I believe there will be a parking solution as a part of the plan. Maybe not with the very first thing that's built, because it's kind of like you can't get the first one coming up, but then when you do, all of a sudden you have three. So I think we may have that very same thing here.
We would park off-site down Adams, closer to the light, or even on the freeway. One thing I would like to ask is if you could clean up the sidewalk along that route, because there's a lot of broken glass and some of the sidewalk isn't even. So that would be great if that might help people walking. Because when you wear sandals and you see all this broken glass or popping over.
Well, that's actually a great point, because next Friday we actually have clean up at the stadium for 3 hours, so the whole front office are going to be down there where we're actually going to be tidying things up around the stadium. So there'll be two things I'll be speaking to you about after. So.
Would that by chance be social media? We're all curious what's happened with Ben Pulsman.
Yeah, I mean, that's again, we want to be fully transparent with that. I think when you look at that particular situation, we're not going to make any excuses at all for Ben. We're going to tell you exactly what happened. Ben was suspended without pay for I think was it 3 weeks. So again, throughout that time, internal investigation. Sat with Ben, and there were multiple staff members involved relative to getting an understanding. Ben is a young man who has obviously issues that need to be dealt with. We were all really disappointed and mortified by what he did. And I think in a situation like that, you can turn around and we can fire him. But then the bigger question then is, well, how do you try to actually implement a form of change and be solution orientated? So also throughout that 3-week period, he was seeing a counsellor, and we put an action plan in place where he would go and seek counselling and ongoing counselling. His role has been reduced. He is continuing to see a counsellor, and he's been left in absolutely no uncertain terms as to what the expectations of the whole organisation are. And I think for us, we took an approach where we wanted to try to be solution orientated. We want him to understand the severity of what he did. He acknowledges that, but also try to put a form of counselling in place to try to help a young man who made a terrible mistake, but was something that we're all mortified by. And Brandon, I don't know whether you want to speak more on that, but again.
Yeah. I think James covered it, but I mean, I think firing was an option, but I think we tried to show a little humanity a little bit if we could, and say, get help, figure out why you felt the need to do something like this. The leash is very, 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 very short, so zero tolerance, obviously. But Ben's been with us for a long time, and we felt like we needed to help him instead of just discarding him. And I think it's helped. I mean, obviously it's early. I mean, he's getting help. He's talking to somebody, and so we'll see how it goes.
Okay, so what happened with Clifton Bush?
I mean, Clifton Bush was a volunteer assistant, and we got to the end of the season, and his period with the club had finished. He was brought on by the previous coach, and then his tenure came to an end.
Okay, so after the allegations and stuff that came out about him, is there a possibility that he will be allowed back with the club in the future?
I'm not fully sure what allegations with Clifton, but he was a volunteer coach that had been appointed by the coach at the time. He left at the end of that season, and certainly, there's no position for Clifton or anybody else. But the coaching staff Kim in particular, I think he's been able to choose and select his coaching staff. Beverly Anna is someone that we haven't really discussed tonight. I can't speak highly enough of Beverly, and her family have, her husband is OT, is coaching in the academy, but she's another great young lady that we have huge ambitions for. I think if you were to speak to the players, they would say how much they've enjoyed her training sessions and how pleased they've been with how she's done.
So I think we'll make time for a couple more. This comes from Trevor Mason for James. Is obviously the club wants to attract larger attendances, but some of the discounts on tickets last season, for example, $5 student tickets, are starting to make a regular season ticket seem more overpriced. How is the club going to package tickets to make sure that they remain a good deal?
Great question. Again, for us, I think when you look at the student ticket, is probably a little bit different to your season ticket. You know, your season ticket, we're trying to get as many membership programs in place, and what we mean by that is discount on our partnerships. So currently, season ticket members get an array of discounts relative to partners. They also have a number of different events that they get to come to, whether it's having lunch at the training ground with some players, whether it's being invited to come to the game that the Lou City team played against Knoxville. So I think there are variants on ticket packages. I think the student ticket price is something we're trying to build into. We're trying to get as many people as we can into the stadium. Most students obviously are in a really difficult situation financially, so it's a way of trying to help them. So it's I can see the understanding in trying to bring them both together, but I think they're two completely different sort of products relative to the overall season ticket package. But the thing to remember, guys, is that the ownership have put huge monetary investment into the training ground, into the stadium, into everything we're trying to build here, and I think it's been an incredible journey when you look at how far the club has come, and I think that's something that we want to continue to build on, but equally we need to try to help, and I think part of it then is to try to bring a friend if we can to one of the games and try to get people to see what's happening here, and I think that's the big thing for us. But I think when it comes to ticket packages, we're trying to do the very best we can to make sure that we're as fair as we possibly can.
Is there any plan in the future to have a bundle of both racing and Louisville City? Because I know some people like to attend both games, but it is starting to get priced out of their budget and stuff with both of those.
That's definitely a great comment, and that's something that I know we've spoken about, and I've sat with Dave, and what we're trying to figure that piece out is something relative to next season. Is there a way where we can give a better offer to people that are coming to both teams? And that's something we're actively working on, and we're very hopeful we can actually have something substantive in place for people that are supporting both teams for next year.
You could discount my parking.
Yeah,
I get full parking for both teams.
But I genuinely appreciate everybody's support with that. We want to make sure that we are trying to be as fair as we possibly can, and that's something that Dave and his team are actively working on, and we're always trying to come up with creative ways, whether it's town hall events or whatever it is. And I think that the monetary aspect is something we are speaking about regularly as a staff, and trying to come up with ways to show people that we care and we are cognizant of that.
And I think also, right, if we can all, patronize and support our sponsors, right, so that hopefully we can get more sponsorship dollars from them. And then other institutions that we know are clearly Louisville or Kentucky or Southern Indiana that are part of us, right, as we all have opportunity to talk with them, talk with them about what they can do to help us, right, because again, we're all in this together. Right? That would help a lot.
I've got one more question from David O'Connell.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Was I just interrupted?
No, your second's too far from the mic.
Sorry. This question comes from David O'Connell, John or James. Does the NWSL plan on implementing any sort of international break? There are several international events coming up this year, and we have a bunch of players who will likely be called up to represent their countries. How will racing and the league overcome this? With stars not playing, attendance and TV viewers will decline, hurting the team in the league.
Yeah, I mean, I think the league are aware of that. I think the Challenge Cup is probably the best example. So I think there are discussions further about how do we, best try to manage that. But I think the league are certainly aware of that relative to the importance of keeping your best players here, having them competing in the league. So it's something I think throughout the course of the next probably 12 to 18 months, I know the league are trying to prioritise some of those aspects, and it's something that hopefully will be addressed.
And we were at board meetings just this week, with the NWSL and talking about the international windows and when we won't play because of FIFA, what's going to happen relative to the Olympics and the World Cup, and the league is aware. One of the things that it maybe helps to understand part of the problem, though, right? There are only a few of us that control our stadiums today. Many of the NWSL teams are just a tenant, and they may be the second or even the third tenant in that stadium. So it becomes more difficult for them to just get dates when matches can take place. So again, it's the same question, right? But as the league grows up and more clubs, build their own stadiums, like Kansas City's in the process of doing today, and there have been a couple of others that have announced they're moving in that direction. As we get more of those, I think that problem gets easier to solve. But you're also, as you're solving it, you're seeing a league that's growing. So the league's gone from 12 teams to 10 to 12 to 13 to 15. Hopefully both these new franchise deals close, and then there'll probably be, just in a few short years, not my decision to make, right? But a few more clubs coming, and we're going to have to all work through those issues and be a little patient. And if snow keeps doing what it's doing, make it even crazier,
I feel like it's going to snow in here. I'm freezing cold.
All right, well, we've kind of reached the end, and like James said, nobody's in a hurry to really get out of here. We appreciate everybody showing up, and this is meant to be the first in a series of town hall events. Hopefully we have a GM on board soon, and you can meet them, as well as some of our players and other staff members this year. So thank you all for taking some time to meet with us this evening, and I guess we can maybe have a cold beer now. So thanks.